Do you recognize any of those names? I'm curious. I know you can't everybody speak out loud, but you can sure think out loud. When you see the name Joseph and Mary, Simeon, Anna, Martha, Lazarus, Mary Magdalene, Philip, Peter, John. When you just first see that name, what do you think? When you see the name Joseph, what's your first thought about Joseph? Or when you see the name Mary, Jesus' mother, what's your first thought about her? Or Simeon. Now Simeon may be a name that a lot of people don't know, but he is the old man that God told him he would not die until he had seen the Messiah. So Simeon was an old man when they took Jesus to the temple. And what about the lady Anna? What do you think about her? For she was there at the same time Simeon was, and she was known as a woman who prayed for people when they came to her. And if you had a serious need for prayer, you might make it your business to look for Anna and find her and say, Anna, would you pray for me? And then you might tell her what it was about. Or Martha, Mary's sister, or Lazarus, whether we're talking about the rich man and Lazarus, or whether we're talking about the Lazarus that was raised from the dead, and Mary Magdalene. What's your first thought about Mary Magdalene? Philip? You heard anything special about Philip in the early years of Jesus' ministry? Or Peter? What about John? I want to throw a question your way, and that is, which one of these would encourage you in some special way more than the others? Take a moment. Which one would encourage you in some special way, perhaps more than the others? I know you're saying it depends on what's going on in my life at the time, aren't you? Because I have to admit that at one time it would be one of these, and at another time it would be one of the others. These were in the life of Jesus. And then when you see these names, Aquila, obviously associated with his wife Priscilla. And did you know, interestingly enough, when the Bible first mentions these two, it's Aquila and Priscilla, and later on, it's Priscilla and Aquila. Maybe it's Bill and Kay, or it's Kay and Bill. What about Epaphroditus? You may know very little about Epaphroditus, but Epaphroditus nearly died in order to take some financial support to the Apostle Paul. And his home congregation was very worried about him. And Paul had a remark to make about Epaphroditus, and we'll look at it a little bit later. Or Timothy. What comes to mind? Just that he's a young man? What comes to mind? Silas, one of Paul's companions. What comes to mind about Silas? Was it the time that he and Paul were in jail in Philippi, singing songs around midnight? Luke the physician, What was there about Luke? Anything catch your attention? Lydia, the woman who sold purple, who was in the city of Philippi. Anything about Lydia or Apollos? Apollos was said to be an eloquent speaker. But that's not all there was about Apollos. Does the name Phoebe ring a bell? A servant of the church at Cenchrea. Or Mark, the one who deserted and the one who later wrote the book of Mark. You see, these people come after the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and they play an important role in the spread of the gospel and the growth of the church. If you were to pick one of these at the present moment, which would give you the most encouragement to live the Christian life, which one might it be? And why would you pick that one? Somebody would say, Bill, you ought to pick Apollos because he was a polished speaker. Well, maybe I should pick Paul because he wasn't. But the point that I want to make is that faithful servants of God are worthy of genuine appreciation. And if these men that we just looked at lived today, pardon the expression, but I think you get the idea, they would put their pants on one leg at a time, just like men of today do. Why? Because that's what they are. They're men of their day. They were women of their day. They would get their hands in the flour. They would sweat over the oven. They would smell that a baby needed to be changed and change the baby. They would fight the flies. Men would go out into the field. They would pull figs, dates, harvest wheat. And the point is a very simple point. God's servants are people who care about the work of God. And I've chosen this particular passage about Timothy. Some of you may not have known this about Timothy. But Paul is writing to the church at Philippi. That's where Lydia was, with the women worshiping down by the river. Lydia was converted to Christ. This is where Paul was thrown in jail, and Silas and Paul were singing songs at night in the jail, and God opened the jail, and the jailer almost took his own life. Paul stopped him, but he became a Christian. And so Paul is writing this letter back to the church at Philippi, but listen to what he says about Timothy. Because what we're looking for the heart of a servant. We're looking for those qualities of God's people that make them noticeable as a worthy example. Not noticeable to be bragged upon, for they would not be boastful, but noticed because their light shines, and it still shines today, even though their earthly light was extinguished hundreds of years ago. And if you wish, we could back up to Moses and to Noah and to Abraham, and to Joseph, and to David, and to Sarah, and to Deborah, and to Rachel, and to Esther. Men who put their pants on one leg at a time, had they lived in our time. And women who would get in their car and drive their children to school. Saints of God, worthy of being recognized, worthy of being imitated, and worthy of being loved and appreciated, just like faithful servants of today. Paul said concerning Timothy, as he was sending him to Philippi, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn your condition. And here's the verse. For I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. I don't have anybody with me who would care for you like Timothy. That's the heart of a servant. Somebody who genuinely cares about God's cause, about God's plan, about God's grace, and about God's people, like Timothy. And then I want to bring up Epaphroditus, because a lot of people aren't aware of this. To the same church at Philippi, Paul writes, receive him then in the Lord with all joy. He's sending him back home is what he's doing. And hold men like him in high regard, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was deficient in your service to me. And what he's talking about, you sent Epaphroditus to me, and he nearly died in the process. And I'm sending him back home. And I want you to throw your arms open and your hearts open, and I want you to welcome this man with great joy, because men and women like him are worthy of being regarded and honored highly. Why? Because they had servant heart. That's why. Servant hearts are concerned about things of God more than anything else. There's a lot of people who are concerned about things about God as long as it fits into my schedule. As long as convenient opportunity comes. As long as it doesn't take me too far out of the way. As long as a servant heart finishes that sentence this way, for as long as I live. For as long as I live. Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things that are on earth. He's not saying don't pay attention to things on earth. That's just not your mindset. Do you pay attention when you're driving? You better. Do you pay attention when you're cooking a meal, ladies, gentlemen? You'd better. Do you pay attention when you're on the job working for someone or overseeing someone? You'd better. But that's not where your mindset is. Your mindset is on the causes of God. That's because you have a servant heart. Matthew 6:33. In the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, well, toward the later part of the middle of it, Jesus said, I know you're worried about a lot of things. I know the Gentiles worry about their job. I know they worry about their house. I know they worry about their car. I know they worry about getting the kids to the school. I know they worry about getting them to the soccer game. I know they worry about all those things. But I want to give you a secret to what real living's all about. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and these things will find their proper place. Because if we don't seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, those things will start taking improper places in our life. And that's why we try to keep a servant heart. Because we have been bought and paid for by the blood of Christ. And if you want me to be a little more literal than servant, then I will. A bought and paid for slave. Bought and paid for by the blood of Christ. Because if I'm not a bought and paid for blood of Christ servant, then I am a bought and paid for nothing, belonging to Satan. He didn't have to give anything to get me. For when I chose to sin, I gave myself to Him. Servant hearts are concerned about our church family. Encourage one another. Build up one another, just as you also are doing. Folks, part of our coming to worship is to build up one another and to encourage one another. But the thing about our coming to worship also means that we tend to have a designated time and a designated place when and where we do that. But once we leave the building, we still get to do the encouraging and the building up. It's not confined to this building or the one next door. It's a part of life. Why? Because we have a servant heart. That's why. John 13:34 and 35, Jesus told His apostles, a new commandment I give you. I can almost guess they're saying, I wonder what a new commandment is. He says that you love one another. Maybe they're thinking now, I already know that command. But then He says, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. I don't want you to love one another like the run-of-the-mill, mediocre Jewish person does. I want you to love me like I love you. And the only way to do that is to have a servant heart. A heart that cares. A heart that rejoices when others rejoice. And a heart that weeps when others weep. Servant hearts are concerned about others around us who are not members of the church. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to his edification. Bill, you are where you are to be a blessing to your neighbors. Now, I thought my job was to let them do their thing and I'll do my thing, and east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. We can't be that kind of a neighbor because we have the heart of a servant. That's why we can't be that kind of a neighbor. We're trying to be a neighbor like Jesus. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to his edification. Galatians 6, 9, and 10. Let us not lose heart in doing good. Do you know why Paul would write that and why God would have him write that? Because we can lose heart. We can get tired of being good. We can get worn out by being doing good. But it says, let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary, give up. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who are of the household of faith. But servant hearts are not only concerned about others in the church, and servant hearts are not only concerned about people in our world, our community, but servant hearts are also very concerned about ourselves. That we maintain that servant heart. And that we maintain the servant heart because that is a reflection of our heart. The heart that we really have. Not a heart that we pretend to have. Not a heart that we simply wished we had. But of the heart that we have and that we cultivate and that we seek to grow and we seek to enlarge. The heart of a servant. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Here's a person who thinks he's a servant of Christ, but he's not a servant of Christ. Just likes to wear the name, Christian. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But each one, you and me, must examine his own work, and then he will have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone. He's not bragging to anybody else. He's actually being able to look inside of himself, and he's able to say, I do have the heart of a servant, and I'm trying to enlarge it. I realize physically we don't want an enlarged heart. That's not a good thing. But spiritually, an enlarged heart is one that can just keep growing until the Lord calls us home. The heart of a servant. Each one must examine his own work, and then he will have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone and not in regard to others. For each one will bear his own load. Jesus said to him, no one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Now, he's not talking about the fact that we will occasionally slip and fall, sometimes deliberately, sometimes just out of pure weakness. And then we get up and we go again, but he's talking about somebody who plows looking back. I plowed a lot of acres. Farmall tractors and John Deere tractors. Don't think I ever plowed with an Oliver tractor or a Case tractor or an Alice Chalmers, but I plowed with the others. And if you glance back real quick and you turn your head back to where you're going, you probably won't even be able to see a bobble. But if you turn your head back and look back for very long, you will not plow a straight row. Or if you do what I did one day, I went to sleep driving the tractor, found myself out in the middle of the field I was supposed to be turning over, which meant I didn't hurt anything because I would eventually get to that part and turn it over with the disc plow. We cannot look back. We cannot go to sleep on God. That servant heart must be kept alive within us. Servant hearts are to be honored and supported in their work. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a servant of the church which is at Cenchrea, that you receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and that you help her in whatever matters she may have need of you. For she herself has also been a helper of many, and of myself as well. Women with servant hearts. Men with servant hearts. Soon afterwards, he began going around from one city and village to another, proclaiming and preaching the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also, listen, some women who had been healed of evil spirits and sicknesses. Mary, who was called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's servant, and Susanna, and many others who were contributing to their support out of their private means. I rejoice over the coming of Stephanus and Fortunus and Archaeus, because they have supplied what was lacking on your part, for they have refreshed my spirit and yours. Therefore acknowledge such men. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. You see, a servant heart is interested in the glorification of the Master. And a godly servant heart is interested in the ultimate glorification of God, of Jesus, of the Spirit, of heaven's eternal plan, of the gift of salvation. Those things are important in the servant's heart's life. We are to be a joy to be around. For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please Him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Why do we need, why must we have a servant heart? And here's your answer. For He rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And the lesson's yours. Your name may not be Joseph. It might have been. May not be Mary. But it might have been. May not be Peter, but it might have been. may not be Dorcas, but it might have been. You see, one of the things that helps us understand we can have a true servant heart is to understand that these people were not God come to earth. They were men and women born like we were, who suffer humanity's foibles and illnesses and joys and sorrows like we do, and men and women who struggle with same temptations and same victories that we enjoy. Who am I talking about? Have you figured it out by now? I'm talking about you and me.